Hi, folks. This is Dina Packo of EmbodyTheSacred.net, and I'm here to share today about a topic that I find very, very interesting, and it is discussing more of the historical and traditional meanings of shamans and who they really are and where they come from, and also witches and witchcraft and paganism. Because as we all know, there's just, massive amounts of misinformation or even commercialization of these practices. And due to various reasons, including colonization, war, the overreach of organized religions, there's been, a lot of persecution and murder of indigenous and traditional healers over the past several hundred years, including the witch hunts. And yet we're seeing in current times a resurgence of these practices and interest in these, all of these practices and practitioners have a commonality of being earth honoring and nature connected spiritual healers, or those who practice earth honoring ways. So I wanted to share with you some of what I've discovered and researched over the years as a teacher and practitioner of contemporary shamanism and cross-cultural healing. And I'm also an ordained minister. So I wanted to share with you some things that I've discovered, and I hope that you learned something new, or if you have something to share, feel free to comment it below the video. Okay. So here we go. So shamans, that title has been appropriated and really kind of spread across the globe and given attributes to everything from soap to different types of music to practices that bear very little connection to the origins of these sacred practitioners and practices. So let's talk about, where does the title shaman and where does shamanism originally come from? So the title shaman comes from the Evenki tribal region of Siberia. Okay, so the original title was saman, and shaman was derived from that title. And the title saman is given to specific, usually male, spiritual practitioners who are called by spirits, usually ancestors or a very powerful nature spirit, to become a spiritual leader and healer in their community in very specific ways and specific practices of shamanic healing. And they would typically involve the practitioner going into a trance, into an altered state of consciousness, and having a connection to their main spirits. And a lot of times, the ancestral spirit would take over their body and do healing work through them. Now, it's a calling, it's a true calling. Often the practitioner would have to go through some really dire near-death experience, serious illness, accident, and the only way that they could heal and recover involved an element of surrendering to the spirits. So there was always this spiritual component. In those tribal regions, this was not viewed as something that one should aspire to. It actually was viewed in many ways as a curse, because the person who was called to be a shaman lived their life, or lives their life, in service to the community and in service to the spirit world. Their life really is not their own. And the work can actually be dangerous at times, believe it or not. So it's a calling and often involves tremendous hardship and difficulty for the practitioner. So they also have very culturally specific rituals, ceremonies, and practices that are directly related to their tribes. Okay, so when researchers, anthropologists, and others started, connecting with some of these traditional healers, not just from Siberia, but really all over the globe, from the Amazon to North America to Europe, somehow, somewhere, the title of shaman automatically gets attributed to any type of indigenous or traditional healer. And that would be the equivalent here in the US of calling every healthcare practitioner a chiropractor. Okay. So that's kind of how ridiculous that is. So what we want to do is really understand that that the shaman had a very specific role. They still do in these areas of the world. They do a very specific type of healing work that's spiritually based and have specific ways of connecting with the spirit world. And it's really not appropriate to call like a Lakota healer a shaman. They have their own language and they have their own titles for their healers. And it's really rather insulting. From the Lakota elders that I've met, they really have no interest in adopting a title from another culture. Now, there are indigenous elders and traditional healers that accept this sort of term now that's been so widely used across the globe, but it's really another sign of our colonial entitlement and white supremacy, that we think we can just take a title from another culture and just apply it across the board to every region in the world. Now, there are similarities between a lot of the different healing practices in different areas of the world. And one of them being this foundation of animism, which is the belief that everything in nature is alive and full of spirit, or has spirits connected to it, like every tree, every plant, every stone, every sacred place, and every place is sacred. The earth herself is alive and is a spirit. So there's this great respect and honoring of the earth. And this is across the board, really, from Asia to Africa to Europe to the Americas, okay, and all the other regions have this similar foundation. All of our ancestral traditions have an earth honoring belief, okay? So shamans also carry that as well. And the shamans, though, do their work in a trance state, often with a drum or a rattle, but drums are very important because the drum will transform into the animal spirit that the hide and everything it's connected to, and help to transport the shaman into the spirit world. Also, the name for the female practitioners from the Siberian region are called Udugan. And that title actually is older than the title Saman. So for anyone in contemporary society who's called to a shamanic path, what we're really doing is learning different practices. And there are, other shamanistic practices, African, European, Celtic, even some of the North American practices through dance, through music, that allow us to go into an altered state of consciousness and connect with the spirit world. So shamanistic practices are common, but the very specific way a shaman does their work is culturally specific, and they have very specific practices. So just taking that title without it being given to us and us being trained by these very specific medicine people from that region it is cultural misappropriation and not okay. However, many of us who have been drawn to a shamanistic and animistic path have learned contemporary practices of shamanism, which are how to go into an altered state, a meditative state, to connect spiritually with our own guides, angels, and ancestors, with nature, to forge a deeper connection with the spirit world, with the sacred. And this is all, available and practical for many of us to be able to do that. But to become a true traditional shaman is, a lot more involved and very culturally specific to that region. Okay, so that's why shamanic practitioner is different from a true traditional shaman. Or, from the Andean region where the Q'ero tribe of Peru comes from, they call their medicine people Pacos. And they have different types of Pacos, the Pampa Masayaks, who work very deeply connected to Mother Earth, Pachamama, and do ceremonies and healing work for the community, very hands-on, with herbal medicines and offerings to Mother Earth. And then the Altamasiacs, who have a more shamanistic way of connecting with the spirit world and with the divine, because often they have been struck by lightning a few times, and they have a way of going into an altered state and connecting with the spirits of mountains, who are like earth archangels, and give guidance, protection, wisdom to the community. So every tribe, every tradition has their titles for their healers. So if we're learning or called to study a different tradition or an ancestral tradition, if it's really a true soul calling, we need to show respect and find out, who or what and how these ways were practiced and what's appropriate for us to work with in contemporary times, okay? And this can vary. So I've worked with a lot of traditional healers and indigenous medicine people, and they've shared certain practices that they really want to be shared widely across the globe. They want Western practitioners to learn these ways so we can return to a more sacred relationship with the earth, okay? But that is where the title shaman comes from. And I just want to show you here on my screen what traditional shaman looks like so that you know the difference, okay? And I just couldn't help myself. So here we go. So on the left is a traditional shaman, actually an Udagan, okay? And she's been chosen by the ancestral spirits. She works on behalf of the community. She performs ceremony and healing work on the spiritual level as an act of service to her tribe and community. On the right is not a shaman, okay? Just so we're clear, this is a horribly misguided cultural appropriator and unfortunately a cult follower of conspiracy theories, and also a capital insurrectionist, a self-appointed shaman, and demanded to have organic meals while in prison. So this is, underlining that colonial entitlement and white supremacist ideology, unfortunately. Now this is kind of a dramatic comparison, but just to make the point. Also, the not a shaman on the right has appropriated ancient sacred symbols from the Nordic traditions and Celtic traditions, which also is not okay, because those are sacred lineages, sacred traditions, and have nothing to do with the neo-Nazi movement and anti-democracy movement that's going on in this country right now. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. So let's move on to who witches are and who they were, okay? So witches, so the term witch comes from the Old English of witche, and I'm pronouncing it phonetically. And then it changed over to witch, typically referencing female practitioners, but also it's been used, of course, as a very derogatory term because of, the witch hunts and our patriarchal society that evolved out of the Roman Empire. And when the Catholic Church aligned itself with the Roman Empire, so there was no separation of church and state, the role of women in Christianity was completely removed. Their power and contribution and equality in Christianity was completely sideswiped, as the rise of this toxic masculine and toxic patriarchal ideology started taking root. And because of these war-focused patriarchal cults and the spread of disease throughout Europe, like with the Black Plague, they were looking for a scapegoat. And who better than, the women and priestesses who were herbalists and healers. And that really started the whole process of the witch hunts. So somewhere between 50,000 and 9 million, we don't have a firm number, which is another big red flag. So between 50,000 and 9 million, mostly women, but some men and some non-binary folks, were killed for practicing their healing practices. And some, who were just, maybe slightly off center in society also were killed for their beliefs. And this is really not just in Europe, but across the globe. So even in Asia, with the traditional shamans, they had to go into hiding because of the government and also the influx of Buddhism. There were actually Buddhist lamas who killed the shamans. There was competition, and same thing, same thing in the Americas, right? We had the genocide of the indigenous people, First Nations people here in the US and Central and South America. So in many areas, 90% of indigenous populations were wiped out due to colonization. So, and that included the medicine people and healers. So even despite that, these ways have survived. And in terms of witches and witchcraft, a lot of people mistakenly believe, because of the influence of government and organized religion, that if someone calls themselves a witch or a practitioner of witchcraft, that they're automatically doing something wrong or evil or involved in with evil spirits. And that's just not true. It really depends on the individual practitioner. I've worked with clients who have been cursed by Catholic priests. We have priests who were and are pedophiles. So it really doesn't matter what one's religious or spiritual practice is. People are going to do bad things. It's part of humanity. It doesn't matter what their spiritual practice or background is. So there are a lot of practitioners of witchcraft who believe in karma and the law of cause and effect and to do no harm. And then there are others who, believe that it's okay to protect one's family, and that can include cursing. And that also goes for shamanic practices, traditional healers. It really depends on the belief system and the practice of the individual practitioner. Again, I've heard of, priests and ministers doing curse work. It does not matter what one's background is. So let's try to stay away from automatically assuming that because someone practices a different religion or spiritual path, that they're doing something evil or wrong. Okay. So what we're seeing today, which is really cool, is a resurgence in the interest of witchcraft and Wicca, which is an organized religion that was based off of traditional healing lineages from Europe, and also blending some Eastern wisdom and other practices depending on the practitioners. We're seeing this resurgence because people are really drawn to the empowerment, right, of being able to connect with their own spirit guides, angels, ancestors, the spirits of nature, but it's also really reconnecting with that sacred relationship with the earth. That's why a lot of folks are being called to a shamanic path, why a lot of folks are being called to witchcraft and Wicca. They know deep in their cells, this is part of all of our ancestral traditions of that sacred relationship with nature and with everyone and everything. Okay. So that just brings us to pagans and paganism. So that's another title that's been misunderstood and misappropriated and given a derogatory alignment, which is not accurate historically, because the title pagan was related to originally to someone dwelling in the country. Okay. So it was really describing a location rather than a specific religion or spiritual practice. Today, it's often connected to those who are practicing ancient spiritual practices, often from Europe and other traditions, of reconnecting with the earth honoring traditions prior to the organized religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Okay. Now, there are also folks like myself, who was raised Catholic, who practice an earth honoring spiritual path, and I still align with and incorporate elements of my traditional Catholic teachings. And it's really comes down to, there's a lot that I don't agree with the church on many levels, but it really has to do with my personal relationship with Jesus, Mother Mary, some of the saints that I resonate with, and really their messages of healing, compassion, taking care of others, taking care of marginalized groups. Really, what Jesus taught about loving others as yourself and having compassion and trying to help, right? And really dismantling systems of oppression and authoritarianism and fascism, which is what, we're unfortunately seeing an extremist movement in the US of, these ideologies rising again. So, but on the other hand, a lot of folks are interested more in their own spiritual empowerment and their own growth and evolution as a soul, and how to be of service to themselves and others, and also dismantling the misinformation, whether it's in the healthcare arena or in the spiritual and religious arenas, and being able to work with some of these traditional ways, whether it's from the witchcraft end or the shamanic end or the animistic and mystical end of things, of finding, reconnecting with our ancestors, our own ancestral traditions, and finding ways to work with our intuition, our own connection to the spirit world, and being of greater service to ourselves, our families, and our communities. So thank you very much for listening. It's been my honor to share some of this information with folks. It's by no means complete. There's way more information out there, but I hope that this was helpful and hope to clarify some perspectives and information out there to open our minds, right, to other practices, other ways. And even if it's not something we want to adopt, we can at least have respect and honor of others and what their process is, especially for women, people of color, and other marginalized groups who are trying to find stable footing during very unsafe times. Okay, so we all need to work together, come together, and especially as a white person, I come from very mixed ancestries and traditions, the Middle East and Arab lineages and Northern African lineages on my mom's side, Southern Italian, Celtic, Eastern European. We need ways to be able to respectfully connect with our lineages, and we can do that from a place of humility and respect without taking the place of what Indigenous elders are sharing in today's day and age. So we need to listen to the elders and approach these traditions as Westerners, and especially as fair-skinned Westerners, with humility and respect. And that means not taking on titles of shaman, unless that's been given to us from the region of the world where the title comes from. Something simple like that. So, I teach a lot of these concepts to my students in my programs and classes. And if this resonates with you, you can certainly look into my work through my website, which is listed below. And I look forward to connecting with you all again soon. Thanks so much.